Yeah. All right, so before we start, a quick disclaimer. The views in this talk are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer. So, hello, my name's Graham. As you can hopefully tell from my accent, I was born here, but I moved to California 9 years ago. Don't judge me. My day job is leading the client engineering team and being heavily involved in the development of the Zero Trust program at Airbnb. I've written several open source tools over the years, including Crypt, the firewall escrow tool, the macOS query extension, and the now sadly defunct Imager. Thanks, Apple. I am one of the co-founders of London Apple Admins. If you haven't been to a meetup yet, the next one is on July 10th. I think I got that date right. Someone give me a thumbs up, who knows? No one knows, cool. I think that's right. It's at the Jamf offices in London. If you'd like to speak, please speak to either Ben Tom, Steve Quirk, Daz Wallace, or I guess me as well, even though I don't really have much to do with it these days, or give us a ping on our website. We're always looking for new voices, ideas, and opinions, so please reach out if you'd like to give a talk at this event or anyone in the future. And I'm on the board for macAdmins Open Source, and we do such things as supporting the Sofa feed and signing Monkey. Running macAdmins Open Source is not free. We have the not inconsiderable cost of the hosting and bandwidth for Sofa in particular. So if you use Sofa, find it useful, or find having code sign Monkey or an OS query extension useful, or even use any of our OS query tables in your commercial product, please consider making a small donation to help cover our costs. The board have been covering a lot of these costs ourselves because we really believe in what we're doing. So the community stepping up and helping us out would be lovely. Finally, I'm a testicular cancer survivor and Movember fundraiser. It was at Macaduck 2018 where I launched my fundraising campaign. I was limping on stage a couple of weeks after having surgery, having a testicle cut out. So far, we've raised over $50,000. And that goes towards funding research and awareness campaigns on a whole host of men's health issues, including testicular cancer and prostate cancer. So if you find this talk useful at all, please find your way to this page. Okay, so let's get on with it. What is Zero Trust? So to understand what Zero Trust is, we should probably look at where we came from first. So here we have a traditional perimeter-based network. The arrow could be a VPN. It could be an 802.1x network when you're in the office. The point is that there are no checks here other than validating a credential. That credential could be a username and password. It could be a certificate. Doesn't really matter. The point is, you don't know what device is connecting. You might be sitting there thinking, they're using a certificate. I know what the device is, but certificates can be copied from one device to another. If you're not validating that the device that is presenting the credential is the one that should be using it, you can't really be sure. This is an oversimplified example of what Zero Trust isn't. So let's get on with what Zero Trust actually is. Right, so the US government defines Zero Trust as this. Authenticate, monitor, and validate user identities and trustworthiness, identify, monitor, and manage devices and other endpoints on the network, control and manage access data flows within the network, secure and accredit applications within the technology stack, automate security monitoring, connect tools across information systems, analyze user behavior and other data to observe real-time events and proactively orient network defenses, and support IPv4 and IPv6. That's a big wall of text, isn't it? It's huge. But what does it really mean? This is how I think of Zero Trust. Obviously, you've got a device component. We'll get into that in a bit more in a little while. This is a Mac conference, after all. You have the user's identity. You have the context in which the request is made. The context could be things like where the location the request was made from, whether the identity has been strongly attested with something like a security key or a passkey, whether the user normally works from that location, all sorts of stuff. You then take all those things and you compare it against your organization's policy. And those things together determine whether access is granted or not. So this talk is Zero Trust for Mac admins, not identity admins, so I'm going to be brief on this so we can move on. But the user's identity is a core component of Zero Trust. So here's the TLDR. Having cryptographic methods of verifying the credential being presented is good. It could be a certificate on the device, it could be a passkey, it could be a smart card. Having those things being non-exportable is better, you know. And I mean not having the credentials stored as a file that can be copied around, having them on a YubiKey, keeping them in the secure enclave, that sort of stuff. And as Apple alluded to earlier, having that credential unlocked by biometrics, Face ID, Touch ID, is really helpful in keeping the credential secure. It allows you to challenge the use of that credential much more frequently without annoying your users by making them type in a PIN or a passcode. So finally, your users are going to lose or forget what they need to get into your environment. You need to be thinking about a robust way to validate their identity. Just getting on Zoom with them, having them hold up their ID, probably doesn't cut it anymore. Now we've got deepfakes to deal with. So as makes it even more confusing, we're going to jump straight to the bottom of our equation. When I talk about policy, I don't mean specifically your configuration of technical controls. I mean the rules by which your organization governs access to data. Your policy might be things like only full-time employees can access this type of data, or mobile devices cannot access this particular resource. Now, as a Mac admin, you may or may not be involved in setting that policy, but you are definitely going to be involved in enforcing it. All right, we've talked about things that don't have a ton to do with being a Mac admin. You're feeling pretty cheated right now, I understand. I'm sorry. So let's talk about what this means to you, the Mac admin. Let's talk about the device. For the sake of this talk, we're to be talking about macOS devices, mostly. But the principles we're talking about can be applied to other platforms too. So I would wager that if I ask someone here, what's the first thing to implement when you're taking on a zero trust project, you're probably going to say making sure your device is enrolled in MDM. And on the face of it, that might be right. How else are we going to get our tools on the device? How else are we going to enforce settings if they're not enrolled in MDM? And yes, MDM enrollment is important, but there is something else you need first. It's not cool, it's not fashionable, and it's definitely not sexy, but the very first step in doing the zero trust thing as a Mac admin is a good device inventory. I don't mean a spreadsheet here. I mean, it's got to be able to talk to your other tools, so it probably needs an API. It needs to be accessible to everybody who's involved with the life cycle of the device, and most importantly, it does need to be accurate. So, why do you need an inventory? After all, you're at a Mac conference. You probably know about Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager. If you don't, 5-second rundown is ABM is a way to allow your vendors to assign devices to your organization, which then allows you to do automated device enrollment of your MDM, amongst other stuff. So now we all know what ABM is. Why do we need a separate inventory tool? Well, first off, and honestly, the only point that ABM ticks off for us for Apple devices, sorry, my screen just went weird there. Anyway, the only point it ticks off for us is establishing device ownership. I'm going to cover ownership models in a little bit later because I think they're important to talk about on their own. Your inventory tool also needs to be able to assign a user to a specific device. So your inventory people are going to like this because they know who's using the device. In a zero trust environment, you could cut down your attack surface considerably if you only allow users to access data on the devices that they are supposed to be using. And finally, you can set a device status. Perhaps the device isn't meant to be used by anyone yet. Maybe it's under legal hold. Perhaps it's supposed to be sitting on the shelf in your stockroom. Perhaps the device has been lost or stolen. You know, having a single source of truth makes all these access decisions a lot easier. So let's do a worked example of why inventory is kind of useful. Here we've got our generic, stereotypical tech user sitting there in a Patagonia jacket. They're using a legacy network. They can access our data on any computer on the planet. That's bad times, right? So with an inventory tool hooked into our zero trust stack, we know that they are accessing our data from a device that we own. And what happens if a user's credential gets compromised and is used on a device that they're not supposed to be using? Well, they're not able to access our data. Even if it is a device that we own, we can restrict their access if it's not the user's assigned device. So this is an incredibly high-level example, but I hope you can see why an accurate, usable inventory tool that integrates with your other security tools really is the cornerstone of Zero Trust. So now we've got our inventory problem sorted, we can talk about MDM. He uses ABM or Apple School Manager to enroll devices into MDM. Yeah, basically everyone, right? No one actually bothered putting a hand up, but I know it's all of you. It's fine. Put your hand up if you knew that you could get the serial number and the macOS version of the device during that enrollment request, and then use that to perform some other checks before enrollment even happens. No? Okay. We'll at least get one. But. All right. So when you enroll your device, you request an enrollment profile. And during that request, it's also going to send machine info, either in the body of the request or in a header, depending on the enrollment type. You get all kinds of interesting things out of that. Like I said, you get the serial number, you get the UDID, you get what kind of device it is. So let's say you had a service running on your enrollment endpoint that didn't just blindly serve an enrollment profile. What if, when you requested the enrollment profile from your MDM, it could talk to your inventory? You could then send over the serial, the UDID, and the device type, then your inventory tool could send back the status of the device. Like perhaps you don't want devices enrolling into your MDM if they're marked as lost or stolen. Or perhaps you don't want devices that aren't inside humans to enroll. And also consider that you do not have full control over what goes into ABM. Your vendor controls that. Vendors can make mistakes. So in this scenario, we're looking at here, our MDM will talk to our inventory tool then gives back the device status back to the MDM. Then we can decide whether we want to return the enrollment profile back to the device to continue with enrollment or not. As an added bonus, this uses the same flows when you're doing an SSO authentication to enroll in MDM. So we return a web view that says, sorry, no MDM for you, please go talk to someone who can help you, if the device is in a state that we don't want enrolling into our environment. So what else can we do with machine info? Something that was introduced in macOS 14 was MDM can request software update. This means that you can force devices to update even before they get enrolled. So it's not only a huge security win, because obviously old versions of macOS will have vulnerabilities that have been patched and that could be exploited. But it's also a much better user experience than getting to a desktop. Like, someone's like, cool, I've got my new Mac, I'm ready to go. Oh, no, nudge or whatever has just popped up and forced me to install macOS update. So you got the device enrolled. What else do we care about? If you ask your resident security person, they're going to say something like telemetry. And when I say telemetry, I mean collecting data from our endpoints. So here's a very small list of things you might want to consider collecting about the device. Some very obvious ones there. You've got the OS version, file vaults, screen locks, SIP, those sorts of things. There are a couple I'd like to highlight. We have EDR listed as not only installed, but actually healthy and reporting back to its respective server. For example, it's trivial to break your MDM enrollment. And for it to look like things are OK from the device point of view, delete your SCEP cert out of your keychain, and your device is never talking to MDM again. This is why it's critical that you're validating that your controls are not only present, but they're actually functional. So what are some sources you could use? I mean, obviously, you have your MDM. That's going to give you some telemetry you can't really get anywhere else these days. If you use Monkey, you could use a reporting tool to get information about its state. You'll also get a lot of information from your EDR. So not only is it an important control, but it gives you insight into exactly what your users are doing with the device. And they're often a lot more real-time than most commercial MDMs. Like most commercial MDMs will check in every few hours. This would be real-time. So it might sound silly when a lot of people talk about Zero Trust as being intended to kill VPN. They're wrong, by the way. Most Zero Trust solutions you buy are just a glorified VPN. But it has the potential, through being a network extension, to know quite a lot about what the device is doing. But last up, we have the crown jewel in our macOS telemetry toolkit, OS Query. So OS Query, for those that have somehow been living under a rock for the past few years, is an agent that can return device information in the form of SQL queries. So why do I love OS Query for Zero Trust? So first off, it's really lightweight. It's got a watchdog built in, so your query can't slam the device. The query will simply be disabled if it's not performant enough. And because it's so lightweight and performance-focused, you could, in theory, run a very small targeted query, say every 60 seconds or something like that. For example, that'll give you real near-time telemetry for almost any facet of the device you care about. It's got an extension system built in. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the lead maintainer of the Mac Admin's OS Query extension. That extension gives you some tables that aren't built into the core product. So it supports logging to disk if you use FileBeat or something like that to get your logs off. It supports sending to an AWS Firehose. OS Query also has support for a complete TLS server as well, which will manage your queries for you so you don't have to ship your config files like in a package or your config management tool. And with a TLS server, you can run on-demand queries. So you don't even need to wait for your scheduled queries to run if you need that information right the hell now. So we've spoken about device identity, but how can you trust that the telemetry is coming from the device you expect it to be? Fortunately, Apple really wanted to ruin my slides this morning. Apple has you covered here. On modern macOS devices, and by that I mean Apple Silicon or iOS devices running iOS 16 or higher, we have managed device attestation. So I think MDA is pretty great. Allows you to cryptographically verify the device is who it says it is. You can use MDA in a couple of ways right now. The first, you're an Acme cert signing request. So the private key for the Acme cert is going to stay in the secure enclave. So you can be sure it cannot be extracted from the device. And you are also certain that the device requesting the certificate is the device that should be requesting the certificate. Next up, you can get the MDA status from a device information command from your MDM. But the response from user-enrolled devices doesn't include the serial number, so you're not really attesting the identity of the device in that case, merely that it's genuine Apple hardware. That might be enough for you, I don't know. Unfortunately, there is no current way to get the attestation status from the device itself, outside of the presence of that certificate. So you can't use it with other tools, such as OS Query or in your own scripts. So if you would like to do that, please file feedback to Apple, because I'd like to do that. So that brings us back onto device ownership models. But really, what I'm talking about is whether you want to deal with bring your own device or not. So 10 years ago, I was hard against BYOD. Like, you can't control them, you can't wipe them, blah, 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 blah. I've since pivoted my stance to making sure that appropriate data is on an appropriately owned device. See, the problem with BYOD is that you have limited legal options if the user's doing something naughty. With a company-owned device, we can put it under legal hold, we can seize the device, we can install software that would be intrusive on a personally owned device. So someone I worked with, when we were talking about our own zero trust strategy a few years back, said this: I'd like to highlight the right device part. So when we're thinking about BYOD, that we may or may not have technical controls over depending on its enrollment type versus a corp-owned device that we have full technical and full legal control over, this statement takes on a whole new meaning. This could be that we only want to allow access to our most sensitive data, not only on devices where we have technical controls, but on devices where we have legal controls too. So we have spoken about what kinds of data we might want to ingest and how we care about device ownership. Now we get to actually enforce our policies. So here's a very few options for enforcing a policy. Like, you could enforce with your MDM. Maybe that would be forcing a software update, or maybe if you've got a compromised device, you could lock it, I guess. But honestly, apart from software update, MDM is not an option for enforcing most of your policies. So that leaves us onto more realistic options. So first off, you've got enforcing at your SSO layer, single sign-on. What's great about that is that your users are probably going through SSO every day. So what's more difficult about that, though, is that you need to link that device identity with that SSO session. You can do that with an app that's running on the device, or maybe using a certificate. That also brings us to our last option I have on this very small and non-exhaustive list: revoking a certificate. Like, if you're using mutual TLS to access your services, Yanking the cert's a great way to make sure non-compliant devices are blocked from accessing your data. But the real problem to solve when you're implementing Zero Trust isn't actually the technical enforcement. It's making sure your users have the information they need to get back into compliance. Like many vendors will have a client app that you can deploy that'll show the device's status, whether they're up to date, whether the firewall's turned on, that kind of stuff. If you're using a commercial product and the information the app gives you is enough, that's great. I, however, have taken the approach that I want to meet our users where they are. This means that I need to be able to tell them exactly what they need to do on any device that they might be using. So this is an awful AI-generated mock-up of a Slack bot that I built that will tell people to update ahead of time. You know, this is great because it's non-blocking, it's on all their devices, and it's not easily missed. You know, Apple software update notification happens in Notification Center, and they are tiny and really easy to miss. It's really bad UI. So here I have another awful AI-generated mock-up of a tool my team built. If you are enforcing with your IDP, perhaps it has the concept of warning users. So the key to getting users to take action and not want to stick your head on a pike is to allow them to take action at the time that works for them. If you're just rebooting their device out from underneath them when you enforce the update of MDM, you're going to have a ton of very annoyed users. When we're blocking access to our data on non-compliant devices, we're able to move the problem of non-compliant people from being an IT problem to being an HR problem. In that, if they decide they just don't want to do their job anymore by not updating, and therefore not getting any access to data, HR are going to deal with them. So one of the problems we had with our legacy tooling is that we couldn't customize the messaging. So it's all well and good telling people to update, but what if they need to do something else as well? Let's say the alert is that Chrome's out of date. Like, how do users update Chrome in your org? You know, they could use the built-in updater. You might want them to use self-service. You might want them to use Managed Software Center. Yeah. In my org, we utilize a browser extension to report up some device state. We notice that sometimes it takes a minute or two after a user has installed the OS update for it to send some data up to the server. So being able to customize our user messaging allowed us to not only cut down on some support tickets, but also allows us to give our users a much better experience. But the biggest issue when it comes to enforcing policy at the SSO layer is that your policy is only evaluated at authentication time. So even if your sessions last only for a really short time, which would be a pretty bad user experience really, you're still only evaluating them against your policy at that point in time. What we really want is for every single one of our requests to be evaluated against our policy every single time. So how can we get that continual policy enforcement we so desperately crave? So one option that is honestly used by many Zero Trust providers is VPN. As I said before, you probably think I've gone a bit crazy suggesting VPN in a Zero Trust environment. But VPN in and of itself is a pretty good technology. And it gives us a nice, easy way to cut off access if we need to. And you can send all the traffic if you want over the tunnel. You just need to make sure that you're evaluating all of the user, the device, and the context before granting access to the VPN, and then again on an ongoing basis. And then you also need to make sure a VPN doesn't have completely unfettered access to your entire network. So next up, we've got the vendor supply products that evaluate signals and cut off access in their own products. Google's got context-aware access. Microsoft has conditional access. They're all much for muchness. They're vendor-specific ways of cutting off access to tools, Google Workspace, M365. That's great, but your office productivity apps are likely to be only a small part of your org's data. So last up, we have access proxies. These are great for apps that you have on-premise or control the DNS for. So you pop your app behind these proxies, and you block all access that doesn't come through the proxy. Then you can cut off access whenever you want. Some of them even evaluate your state in every single request. So you can immediately cut off access to non-compliant users and devices. So that's all well and good for apps you control entirely. Apps that live in your private cloud, perhaps or on-premise in a data center, where you host it yourself, control DNS, etc. So a quick show of hands, who uses any SaaS app at all? And I'm going to force someone to put their hand up, because I don't believe that none of you do. Okay, a lot of you are lying then. Okay, well, okay. Right, so who's entirely SaaS? You have nothing hosted on-premise at all. Like, no data centers, nothing in private cloud. Yeah, VPN and access proxies aren't going to do anything for your SaaS apps. So the shared signals framework lets different systems, like your IDP and a SaaS product, talk to each other about security events. Like when a user's session becomes risky or their access needs to be revoked. Helps services react quickly, stay in sync without needing to constantly check in with each other. So it's fair to say I am ridiculously excited about SSF. So excited that I'm going to talk about it, even though I promised this was a talk for Mac admins, not identity admins. Sorry. Before SSF, all we had if we want to stop a user accessing our SaaS tool was Skim. So Skim's not really a security tool, it's a provisioning tool. It's a way for you to tell the app to create a user account, update user account properties, delete the account, that sort of stuff. For most tools, you are deleting the user account entirely when you deprovision an account with Skim, which is fine when you're offboarding someone, but if you want to change someone's access temporarily, or even like halt their access and keep their data intact while you're performing an investigation, like Skim's not really the tool you need here. So with SSF, you have a protocol that is designed for rapidly sending security events to your apps. So for example, you can have when your security agent detects a device in a specific location, for sake of argument, let's say Russia or China. Maybe you want to block and terminate all sessions until that device is out of the country or until that you can inspect the device, make sure it's not been tampered with. Sure, you can do that, but you can also do much more interesting things. For example, your organization might do business in one of those countries. So we could use SSF to tell the tool that the user is currently in this authorized but still pretty dodgy country, and the tool will then use that information to maybe restrict the data set the user has access to, or perhaps it's going to dramatically shorten the user's session length so it'll force them to MFA more often. The possibilities really are endless here. Several IDPs support SSF already, but a number of SaaS apps that support it is frankly disappointing. But one that might interest people here is that Apple Business Manager supports it. So it's not just SaaS apps. Your security products can send telemetry into your IDP using SSF. So all of these things were possible before using various vendor APIs, sure. But it's only now we've got this universal protocol, so hopefully that'll mean our tools become much more interchangeable. So that's it. That's my vendor agnostic overview of Zero Trust for Mac admins. So what would I like you to take away from this? So first up, a device inventory that is accurate, has assigned users, and device status, etc., and has an API so you can integrate it with your other security tools is absolutely vital. If you don't have an inventory, you need to start there. Ideally, you're going to be using that inventory to independently control which devices are able to enroll in your MDM in addition to being present in ABM. If your MDM vendor doesn't support this, go and ask them to. It's really quite easy. Telemetry is the bread and butter of Zero Trust. Like, you need as much as you can get. You need it to be super fresh. Device data from 2 hours ago, that doesn't cut it anymore. You need the data to be as real time as you can possibly get it. And talking of real time, you need to continually assess the device to user in the context against your policy and have enforcement points that can be used at any time. But really, the most important thing, if you only take one thing away from this talk, is that you need to help your users know what they need to do. If they cannot fix the thing themselves, you need to tell them who to talk to. Like, most people want to be good citizens. Help them to do so. All right, that's really it. Thank you to Maxine, Aidan, and the rest of the macOS team for having me here. It's been lovely to see all my new and old friends. You can find me on these places. I have a rarely updated website. I'm Greg Gilbert Mac admin Slack. You can send me abuse there if you want. And you can also send abuse via email, my very cryptic and hard to guess email address. If you found this talk useful in any way, please consider donating to the Movember Foundation and help save some of the lives of the people you might very well be sitting next to. All right, and yeah, we've got time for some questions, I think. Any questions? Nope. Wonderful. You all know exactly what to do now and then go implement Zero Trust.
Let's see if there's any on the app. There's a question here around what the main blockers of...
Sorry?
There's a question on the app around blockers for trying to implement zero trust for the first time. What would be, how would you deal with...
blockers? Depends what they are. Are we talking technical? Are we talking organizational? You know, there are lots of blockers around doing zero trust now. There's, yeah, is there any more detail to that question? Or?
It's just that, but maybe it's around more like a business that's not used to there being proper management in place, you know, when you're able to ride freely for so long.
Okay, so you need to be able, you need to have pros and cons for every decision you make, right? So you need to be able to demonstrate the security advantages, like what's the risk that you're guarding against, like, you know, if your data is important to your business, you know, how would you feel if this data ended up on the front page of a newspaper? That's basically what you need to think about, because if you're not implementing security controls like this, you might as well just not be doing anything, I think, honestly. Like, if you can access your data from any device, you have no idea what is happening to your data. So there's that part. And like I'm saying, like, a lot of the resistance comes from this being difficult. You know, we're going from having 0 control to 1,000 control, so it's really hard. Like, users are going to get overwhelmed. They've got so much to do. That's why user comms are absolutely vital. You know, you need to bring people along on the journey. Like, they want to do the right thing. They want to do their job. Like, they probably like it there. Yeah, help them to do their job. Help them to be compliant.
Just again, if there's any, oh, there we go.
So a lot of times when non-technical folks run into zero trust access, a lot of them see it as a stick. It's yet another rule that security is imposing on them to make their jobs harder. Mm-hmm. What's the best way you found to make this a positive thing for folks? Here's why you want to, here's the benefit you're getting from this, aside from, of course, staying off the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah, and continuing your employment.
Minor things like
that. Yeah, that habit of eating that we all have. How you bring it as a pro, like if you're really tiering your data access, like you could implement BYOD. They can use whatever device they want if they want to. Like I've worked in a lot of this, like where I work now is the first place I've worked for a very long time where we have a BYOD program. And that's because I like using my phone. I don't want to use whatever old phone that you get issued by your company. So you don't have to carry around 2 phones maybe. You know, that's a pro. How else do you sell it to people? I mean, it's tough. Like, security is a tough sell. I mean, that's really where it comes down to. You might be killing VPN. If you have an unreliable VPN, that's a pro for some people, not having to connect to stuff. Our zero trust solution doesn't rely on VPN. So, you know, that's definitely a boon. I mean, I know it's not true for the majority of things out there, so I can't say that's going to be applicable for most people. I think that answered your question.
I think so, yeah.
Felt
and honestly, you can use your own stuff and you don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops is a decent selling point.
Anyone else? Going once? Going twice? All right, adjourned. Thank you.
All good?